Welcome back, everyone. As a winter storm rages out my window, a couple of days ago, something occurred in the kayaking world that I want to talk about, which is Jackson Kayaks is up to shenanigans again and went and purchased, acquired, use the term you prefer, Eddyline kayaks, which caught me by surprise. I got a number of thoughts. I've literally spent the last 2 days talking to people and thinking about this and how I feel about this and what I think this is going to mean. I think it's good and bad. Let's talk about both reasons. Let's go. Okay. I'm surprised. I'm still surprised. Okay, let's talk about this. A year ago, I released a video called The Changing Face of Outdoor Retail, where I said this. Second. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the companies that service us in paddling and the outdoors in general, but more specifically to paddling. So arguably the two biggest, this is arguable, it depends on whose numbers you believe, the two biggest manufacturers of paddles is Aquabound and Bending Branches, and they are the same company. They have the same parent company. Johnson Outdoors is Ocean Kayaks, is Old Town, and is also Eureka, which makes tents, and is also Jetboil. They're all the same company. Not to mention a handful of like fishing companies, and a scuba company, Scuba Pro, is Johnson Outdoors. And Johnson Outdoors is the same family of people that are SC Johnson, which is all of those like billion-dollar cleaning company. Same people, not same companies, but same people. Confluence Outdoors is Pelican, Dagger, Perception, Boardworks, stand-up paddleboard company, Advanced Elements, inflatable kayak company, Wilderness Systems, and GSI Outdoors. Those are all really the same company with different brands. Same parent company owning little companies, but they all answer to the same company. Native Watercraft merged with Bonafide Kayaks in 2019, and that includes Liquid Logic and Hurricane Kayaks. The Claris Corporation owns Black Diamond, a climbing company, climbing and skiing and stuff like that, and a company called, I think they're originally a French company called Pieps. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, P-I-E-P-S. They're an avalanche beacon company. Arguably, if I recall correctly, pretty much invented the avalanche beacon, and as well as a bunch of like hunting and ammunition companies. So those are all very big companies, and particularly the boat manufacturers, Wilderness Systems, Perception, Old Town, are the bulk of the recreational and some touring kayaks that are sold. Even Hurricane falls under there. And the reason that that's important is that what we end up with in the paddling world is several big companies owning lots of littler companies. And this, to me, is problematic. But before I explain why, 8 months ago, I said this. Was Werner Paddles, at first calling it a merger, what we now know was an acquisition. Werner Paddles was acquired by Jackson Kayaks. Werner has been a privately owned company for its entirety. Werner Sr. passed away. The founder, Werner Sr., passed away, I want to say about 18 months ago. I did a post on my Instagram. If you didn't see that, it was just saying thanks for decades of great paddles. I've loved my Werner paddles. I've used them forever. I am a little concerned about this merger for a couple of reasons. First is that I think like Jackson is a great company. They started as a whitewater company started by Eric Jackson. They're not really players in the sea kayak world. And so my concern with Werner Paddles being bought by Jackson was that Jackson, while a great company, a owned by paddlers, run by paddlers. I really like that. They didn't really have any credibility in the sea kayaking world, which is the world that I live in. It's a small world. And so my concern was that they would slowly phase out or at least stop R&D on those high-end Werner paddles that so many of us use. This purchase of Eddyline sort of gives them some credibility, and we'll talk about that. But first, I want to draw some comparisons. So Jackson Kayaks owns now Eddyline and Werner. They also own, obviously, Jackson Kayaks, Blue Sky Boatworks, Orion Coolers. I think that's it. For comparison, you have a company like Confluence Outdoors, which there's some weird things here. Confluence is a big company. Confluence owns Wilderness Systems. Confluence owns Perception and Dagger and Boardworks. And if you look online, it looks like they own Pelican. They own Pelican Kayaks. But Pelican International actually owns Confluence. And my issue with that is that when you get really big companies that own lots of small companies, people tend to be more concerned about making money than making great products. And I talked about this in that other video. I'll put a link to that up here. I worry about the board of directors saying, oh, let's do away with that because it's not really making money. An example of that is Mad River Canoe, which was owned by Confluence. They shut down production in 2022. So Confluence is a big, huge company. They are not like the people that work there, probably aren't paddlers. The people that work at Jackson Kayak are paddlers. Similarly, another company called Big Adventures owns Hurricane, Liquid Logic, Bonafide, and Native Watercraft. That company also is run by paddlers, and they're passionate about paddling and making great boats. And I feel like that is sort of where we are with Jackson. I feel like Jackson is acquiring these small companies to broaden its market, but at their heart, they are a paddling company. And that gives me some solace. That makes me feel good. It means that I feel like that we'll get better products down the road. It gives me hope for Werner products. So I said that I thought that the name Werner would disappear. I think that's less likely now. I think that having Eddyline, sort of an entry point into longer kayaks, helps in terms of their ownership of Werner. So in that sense, I am excited. Now, I will say I put a little asterisk on Eddyline when it comes to sea kayaks, the world I live in. Eddyline makes beautiful boats. However, in my opinion, they don't really make a sea kayak. The Sitka XT is 15 feet 3 inches, is a beautiful boat. I haven't had opportunity to paddle one yet. I would love to. If you've got a Sitka XT and live in Eastern Pennsylvania, let me know. I'd love to paddle that boat. But to me, it looks more like a long wreck kayak than a short sea kayak. So it's got a lot of sea kayak features. It's got a skeg. It's got dry storage. No dry storage is really dry. It's longer, but it's very wide, 24.5 inches wide. If you compare that to, say, the Delta 17 that I paddle, which is 22.5 inches wide, 2 inches doesn't sound like a lot, but it is huge. That is a huge difference. That Sitka is going to be way more stable than my Delta is. There are other factors with stability. We've talked about this before, hull shape, things like that. But in general, that wider boat is going to be way more stable, which in my experience is going to make that boat perform not as well with things like edging. It's going to be harder to get on edge. It's probably easy to hold on edge. But yeah, it's just not as high performing. I would love to see a 17-foot touring kayak come out of Eddyline. It would be amazing. I think they could really do some nice stuff with it. So I'm excited to see Jackson. Well, no, let me rephrase that. I'm not excited to see a little company get absorbed by a bigger company. But I am excited that it was Jackson that bought Eddyline as opposed to Confluence, or even worse, Johnson Outdoors. So Johnson Outdoors, a huge company, owns Old Town and Ocean Kayak, a bunch of fishing brands. It owns Jetboil, it owns Scuba Pro. In my opinion, they would be a worse owner for Eddyline, because I don't think that they would probably even continue the Sitka. Most of these companies that I'm mentioning, the kayak companies, don't make boats over 12 feet or, 12 and a half feet. Eddyline does, but Hurricane I don't think does anymore. Liquid Logic I don't think ever did. Old Town used to, doesn't anymore. And at Confluence, you've got Wilderness Systems, you've got Perception. Perception used to have the Essence. Before that, they had the Eclipse. My first boat was a Shadow, which was a lower volume version of the Eclipse. Loved that boat. When they were acquired by Confluence, those boats disappeared. And if you want a touring kayak, really your only option from Confluence is the Wilderness Systems Tempest, which is a great boat. I'm not a huge fan. I know people that love that boat. A good friend of mine paddles a fiberglass version. I think it's called the Tempest Pro, which it's not made anymore. But yeah, so they make, in Confluence land, the only touring kayak is that Tempest from Wilderness Systems. So I'm happier, I guess, that Eddyline was bought by Jackson. And I think that this speaks to good things for Werner. I think those two companies pair really well. I am still curious to see what happens down the road in terms of how it plays out. I think Jackson is trying to become one of these companies that has multiple outdoor brands, and whereas Big Adventures really only has paddle brands, Jackson owns a cooler company, which I think is a really interesting thing. Now, you could say those coolers are made by rotomolding, which is the same way they make kayaks, so it sort of crosses over, but still, it's a cooler, it ain't a kayak. So I'm curious to see where Jackson's going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 years. I'd really love to know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Okay, but there is one more thing, and I have to be completely honest. This video was done, I was uploading, and I thought of just one more thing. Who is Jackson Kayaks gonna buy next? And I have a couple ideas. Kokatat is privately owned, and it would give them PFDs as well as some clothing, but most importantly, dry suits. I think that would be a great ad for Jackson Kayaks. Similarly, but I don't think as good, is Astral Buoyancy. Astral, of course, makes PFDs. I use an Astral PFD. I love it. They make a lot of clothing and footwear at this point. So if Jackson wanted to slide into lifestyle gear, meaning clothing and footwear, I think that would be an interesting way for them to go. Let's see if I'm right. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do next. I don't know if they're going to do anything next, but I think that those two purchases make sense, and I'd be really curious to see what happens with that. So we're going to end there. Really, this time I'm done. If you enjoyed this, do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you outside.